Okay, so we are back, and today we're going to be working on making a challah, which if you're Jewish or celebrate Shabbat, is the traditional braided bread that you'd have on a Friday evening. And if you're not, then it's probably something that you've had in the form of French toast, or it's a really good sandwich bread, or just generally delicious. So there's a lot of different ways to make it, a lot of different traditions, and a lot of people argue about the best way to make it. The way that we do it in our house every Friday, and I can guarantee you that it meets with rave reviews, involves no eggs in the batter. The eggs only happen when we brush it over the top. And you might think, well, what's challah without eggs? But you'd be surprised how much it'll taste just like what you think it's supposed to taste like. The eggs that are in it aren't always totally necessary. So I'm going to show you a very simple recipe. That's flour, water, salt, yeast, just like we talked about last week, but the addition of honey in the dough. And then otherwise, everything will feel the same until we get to braiding it. It'll be just like last week, where I'm going to be measuring by weight using my scale, but folks who don't have a scale, that's okay. I'm also going to give you the standard volume measurements. So when I said last week, the first time that we made bread, we talked about how you can make bread any size as long as the ratio of flour to water is the same. And that if you're going to make one loaf of bread, generally 400 grams is a good amount to make. So today I've got help from my other kid, an intrepid 5-year-old. You want to say hi?
Hi.
All right. And we're going to be first mixing the flour, the water, the salt, the yeast, and the honey this time. Mixing it all up, getting it nice and worked together in our huge bowl, and then we'll let it rise for a little while, and we'll come back to it, and we'll show you rolling into snakes and braiding and all that fun stuff. All right, so you ready?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay, so we've washed our hands. We've weighed everything out in advance, and you'll see here that... No, you did before. It's okay. It's okay. Anyway, you'll see here that this is just about 3 cups. Now, I weighed this, so it's exactly 400 grams. And remember, if you don't have a scale to weigh it on, a good thing to do would be to just go ahead and pour it directly into one of these glass measurers rather than scooping it out with one of these things. Because if you scoop it out with one of these things, it can be really packed down, and then you get a lot more flour, and the bread might feel dry and you're not sure why. So 400 grams of this, or 3 cups. You want to pour it into the big bowl for us?
Yeah.
And just dump it right in there. That's great. Awesome. And then water is a little easier. It's it'll be a hefty cup, or maybe a cup and a teaspoon. It doesn't matter that much, but this is a little bit more than a cup. It's exactly 250 grams. So you want to dump this in there?
Yeah.
All right. Remember from last week, a lot of people will tell you that you absolutely have to proof the yeast first. You put the yeast with a little bit of honey and water and wait 5 minutes. That is not necessary if you know your yeast to be less than, say, 10 years old. It really isn't a thing that you have to do. Yeah. So what we're going to do now is we're going to mix this up. And you can use pretty much anything for that. As a matter of fact, we'll go ahead and use just a regular old teaspoon measurer. So you want to give this a nice slow stir at first so we don't splash water. You'll notice that as we stir here, we're not going super fast at the beginning, and then once the flour incorporates into the water a little bit, or vice versa, I guess, then you can get a little bit more oomph to your moving. So you want to give it a little bit more now. If you have a stand mixer, you mix it on level 2 at this point, and if you don't, then you keep your hand on about a level 2. You can give it a little bit more oomph than that.
Like this.
Yeah.
Kind of like too much mixing.
That's okay. All right. So once you get to here, can you take a look at this? You'll see that there's some parts that aren't incorporated. This is real dusty flour right there, but this is real congealed flour there that's really gone into with the water. You really want to work together with all the different parts of the bowl to try to combine it. So you see, and at some point you're going to find that you just can't do it anymore with an object or a spoon. If you have a wooden spoon, that's great, but still, or a spatula. So what you'll end up doing is just getting your hands a little dirty. So you see that. Yeah. Give me 1 second. Let me get it more into a ball, and then you can be the person. I know. So you know, you always want to assume that you're going to end up doing a lot of counter cleaning, both before and after. Before, so that you can work on, I think you're ready now. Yeah, go ahead. Give it a, so we're just kind of working it around. You see when it's on my hands, I resist the temptation to add any more flour to it because that's not the way to go. So,
the first one, so, and it is kind of like Play-Doh.
it is, so put it down. Now with honey, I don't tell you how much to add. I just add some. Like a squirt and a half, maybe, I don't know, is that a tablespoon maybe, teaspoon? Anyway, it doesn't matter that much. You can, yeah, well let me get this first little bit of honey in because that's really sticky.
That much.
All right, so we've got ourselves a good ball now. And you'll see that at this point, we've added the flour and the water first, and then we added the honey. And now all we've got left is the salt and the yeast. When you can add the salt or the yeast first, but you don't want to put them in both at the same time. You want to make sure that you've incorporated them, you know, even a little bit before one or the other, because they don't play nice together when they're both exposed. So let's get this, make a little hole in the honey. Can you pour the salt right into that hole? Perfect. That was about one full tablespoon of salt. So at this point now, we've gotten 3 cups of flour, or 400 grams, about 1 full cup of water, a little bit more, that's 250 grams, 12 grams of salt, which is just about 1 tablespoon, and a big squirt of honey. Which I really don't know how much it is. I've never really thought to measure it because I can only tell when I do it if it's enough. If I try to do it into a spoon, I think it would not work the same way. So, here we go. Okay, so at this point, we have incorporated our flour, our water, our salt, and our honey. And we've got this nice firm ball. Now that the salt is in there, it's a little bit safer to pour the yeast in. Typically, a packet of yeast is about, no, we're gonna just wait for a second, okay. Typically, a packet of yeast is about 2 1/4 teaspoons. But we're making this a little bit later in the day, and so as a result, we're gonna add a full tablespoon. You might notice that this is the same dirty tablespoon that we used a moment ago. That's just fine, doesn't make a lick of difference. So we put in the full tablespoon, and that'll get it to rise a lot faster. So honey, can you try to incorporate all that in?
Yeah.
You know, fold it, grab it. You'll see there's there's plenty of methods if you're doing a real wet dough, but if you're doing a nice dry dough like this is about 62% hydrated, then you don't have to worry so much about what you use to put it together or the speed with which you do it or how exactly you incorporate it. The bottom line is you want all those little granules of yeast to be invisible. And once they are, you're good to go. So this guy is pretty much ready at this point. We've incorporated most everything that we needed to, and it's a nice ball. It's wet but not too wet. It holds. You can move it and ply it, but it's not feeling like it's incredibly, incredibly hard. So
it's so hard to go through.
Well, it can be. So what we're going to do is we're going to let it sit for about 2 hours if we can in a nice warm place. We might get the ball a little wet on the outside, and then we'll come back to this video and take a look at how big it's gotten and sort of make our next moves. All right, so it's been, how long has it been, like 2 hours?
So like 1 hour or something.
It's been like 1 hour. What we did was...
It is 4:26.
It's 4:26. So we're planning on, that's actually perfect. We're planning on having a dinner that's maybe around 6 o'clock. And so I'm gonna start doing the braiding of this challah right now. As you can see from where we left it last, we mixed it in this utterly enormous bowl, and you don't need to use a bowl quite this enormous. But when you do put it in a big bowl, the nice thing is that you can really keep all the mess contained into one bowl. And this is about doubled in size. It looks maybe small in comparison to the bowl that it's in, but trust me when I say this is perfect for a family of 4 or even 5 for challah.
Even 6.
Might be a little small for 6. I don't know. We usually make a bigger one when we have people over. So what I'm doing, if you see what I just did here, is I'm not trying to poke lots of holes or punch it down or anything elaborate like that. I'm just trying to pick it up. But the way to pick it up is best to sort of work fast. And then we're going to turn it right out onto the counter here. And you notice I haven't floured my surface yet or done anything crazy. I'm just simply putting it down, and it's good to be a little sticky right now. In a moment, we're gonna have it be nice and floured. but let's see. So I'm gonna cut this in half so it looks like a brain.
Brain.
And then I'm gonna cut this in half. And Olivia, you wanna start making some snakes here for us?
Yeah, so, and may I actually make all of the snakes?
No, I'll make a couple and you make one. So you see that when we roll in the snakes here, what we're gonna do is we're gonna take it, yeah, actually that's perfect. You can use the table, you can use your hands. What you don't wanna do is you wanna resist the temptation of just pulling it, because what'll happen is you'll just pull it apart. Instead, you'll see that I'm rolling a little bit, and then when I see that this area is kind of thin, but that area is thicker, I'll move down, I'll start working on that. And you want them longer than you'd expect to make a challah. So, because what's gonna happen is gluten is that main and amazing ingredient that makes bread chewy and hold together. If this were rice flour, I would give it the slightest tug and it would fall apart. But gluten is super elastic, and that allows it to get big, but it also means that if I put it down, it's going to begin to pull back. I don't know if you can quite see that on the camera, but it pulls back and it kind of goes back to its old shape. So what we do is we make it a little bit longer than we thought, and then after, about a minute, it'll be relaxed and pretty good. Okay, so that's a perfect one. You're getting right there. You make it a little bit longer. I find sometimes if I work too much in the center, I'll make a sort of barbell where it's real thin here and there's two sort of blobs in the end. Almost there, perfect. Keep going. These, if you're baking for something really fancy and you have a lot of people, then it's a great idea to weigh with your trusty kitchen scale each one of these snakes.
Oh yeah.
But if you're just having a family dinner or you just kind of want to have something fun, then it doesn't really matter. What I did where I just went in half and then in half again into our 4 quarters, that's just fine. So you see now that we've got these things roughly the same size, but don't worry, they'll all eventually,
but this one.
Yeah, you keep going. You're doing great. By the way, this is my Bubby's apron right here. This thing is, I don't know. We saw a picture of her wearing it in like it must have been 1960 anyway. So it's made many a challah, I'll tell you what. And a lot of borscht and her famous mock chicken liver, she would say. All right, so let's let it go. And then you see this one's a little bit thin there, so I'm not gonna work on that side. I'm gonna work over here. And you'll notice that now we've got 4 snakes that are roughly the same length. This one's a little short. Okay, so now we've got our 4 snakes and we're getting ready to braid. Now you notice I resisted the temptation to put flour on this countertop because it's really best, unless it's a very wet dough, to not try to dry it out too much with the flour. And also, this is the part that you're really gonna be seeing. So if there's a lot of flour, it'll look dark when you do the final bake and it won't take to the egg wash nearly as well. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna braid. We have 4 snakes here, as you saw before, but we could just as easily have had 3 or 5 or even up to 10. I've made them with several different kinds. The process is exactly the same. It's always just over, under, indefinitely. So I always start with the outside one, and I go over, and then this one I'm gonna go under, and then this one I'm gonna go over. And when I'm done, I wanna make sure that I'm not doing this up here somewhere. There shouldn't be any real gaps. There could be a little tiny one like that, I suppose, because the rising will fix it. But when I do it, you'll notice I'm not working up here and having something like that, but rather I'm going way over tight and then under and then over. I'm always starting from this outside. It doesn't matter which side, but as long as it's the same side every time. So this side, over, under, over. You wanna take a couple? Nice and slow. Now, see, when I try to get that gap up. Perfect. Exactly right. All right, let's try it again. No, that's fine. That's okay. So go over.
Yeah, it is.
Over, under, and then this one way over here. Over.
Over. So in.
There you go. So now we're near the very. No, I'll do the end here. So this last part is kind of tricky.
Practice to do it.
Yeah, well, we'll keep practicing sometime, but not right now, okay?
So,
once you get this part here, the best thing to do, if you can, is just sort of round it off, tuck it under, and then on this side, it's the very same thing. You can even undo the part that you connected at the very base, and you don't have to do this, by the way. A lot of the rising will fix this problem. But you can undo this and then go from the opposite side on this part and go over, under, over, over, under, over. And then when you find yourself with just a little bit left, you can sort of tuck it under and shape it up, and you've got yourself a bread. Now, we now have a braided bread. You'll see that there's some gaps still in these areas, but you don't have to worry too much about that. When this rises for this last about an hour or so, then it's going to already kind of fill in those gaps by rising. And also, once it goes in the oven, it's gonna have a tremendous quick rise, which is called oven spring. And that's, it does a lot in terms of repairing any kind of blemishes that you might see. But you see that it's roughly smooth. There's no bumps or pieces of flour on the top or anything else like that. So it's time to move it onto the vessel that it's going to be baked in. In this case, I'm using a plain oven sheet. It's a cookie sheet. You can use one with sides like a cookie sheet, or you can use a flat one like an oven sheet. If you have a baking stone or a pizza peel, those things are fine too. Pizza stone rather, sorry. And we'll put this down. I put parchment paper on top of mine. And I do that because sometimes the egg will burn when you brush it. And when you get egg all up along the sides, it can be a bit hard to clean, especially if you have a finish on it. So I like to use parchment paper on top, but you don't have to. A word to the wise though, parchment paper and wax paper are not the same thing. Learn from my experience when I saw fire in my oven once that wax paper is very much flammable, parchment paper is not. So don't make that mistake. All right, so I'm gonna lift this up. You can manhandle a little bit. You don't have to be so worried about the shape, although you don't wanna aggressively pump it down. So now you have a beautiful bread that's sitting here to rise. We'll give it another hour. It doesn't have to be in an especially warm place or anything else like that. It just needs to stay more or less how it is. And then we're gonna brush it. And once we brush it with egg, then we can cover it with sesame seeds or poppy seeds or whatever we wanna do. And we'll get to that in just a moment. And we're back. So we've let this guy rise for about an hour. It doesn't have to be a full hour if it's in a warm place, and it can be a lot longer than an hour if you put it somewhere cool, either in a non-drafty kind of cool space in your kitchen or even in the refrigerator overnight if you needed to. But the rising really, if you want it done fast, you put it in a warm place. If you want it done slow, you put it in a cool place. And if you want it done for about an hour, you can just leave it right on the counter at a typical room temperature. We are ready to bake it, but for the beautiful covering on top that makes a beautiful golden brown color on the challah. So I'm gonna take one egg, I'm gonna crack it in anything, and you can put it in a bowl, it doesn't really make a difference. I usually use this guy because it's usually got something in it already. So what I'll do is pretty straightforwardly just whip it up. And you see that when I do this, I'm not doing anything crazy with a whisk. Just enough with a fork to make it so that you don't see individual strands of yellow in there. Once that's done, I use one of these brushes. Now, these things are sometimes made out of cloth, like individual, almost like a paintbrush. And I don't prefer those myself. I generally love to use the silicone ones. They're easy, they're dishwasher safe. If you don't have either one of those things, with a clean hand, you can simply brush the egg directly on top. But if you have one of these, great. So I'm just gonna get in here, make sure that it's covered over with the egg wash, and I'm gonna paint gently over it. Now remember, I'm not pushing hard because I don't want any air bubbles that are in there to deflate and make the bread small and too dense again. I'm also not being super careful about the sides because we're on parchment paper, which is by its nature not very sticky. So we've got everything painted on. If any flecks of dirt are on there or dust or something like that, you can move those off. Thankfully, you're baking this guy for a little while, so you don't have to worry too much about germs, but occasionally a sticky dough will just collect any bit of other spices that are in your kitchen or something. So you see that when I've painted here, I haven't gone absolutely bananas. I've just made it so that it's covered over. If you see that there's a little bit of extra sort of flooded egg in these small center pieces, that's just fine. As it rises and gets much bigger, that will all sort of be accounted for and end up being used up by the larger bread that you're about to have. Okay? The last step for me is I will use either poppy seeds or sesame seeds. You don't have to do this. You can use all things, you know, like everything bagel spice is a popular one. I really enjoy sesame seed, but I don't have any with me right now, so we'll just do poppy seed. It gives it a nice look. And as this rises, this might seem real dense, but you'll see that when this thing doubles in size, it's not going to be an issue. I also like to put a tiny little bit of honey over the top. This is not a thing that you measure. This is just a thing that I do a very quick across, and that's it. If people like their bread really salty, or they enjoy that nice crisp salt, or you're working with sesame seeds or something that you know, has a strong flavor unto itself, then what you can do is you can also grate some, you know, coarse salt directly over the top of it. I don't think that's absolutely necessary for me right now. But we're going to take this and we're going to put this in the oven on 350 for, it really, I mean, again, it depends on the size of your oven, but at least 30 minutes is a reasonable amount of time. The best way to do it is to look at it periodically, ideally without opening the oven, just using the oven light. Is to open it, or is to look inside and see if you have a rich golden brown color. That almost always does the trick. All right, so let's get it going and we'll take it out in a few minutes. Here it is. So we took it out of the oven. I just brought it onto a cutting board. But as you can see, the rising really gives it a checkerboard effect because the parts that were brushed with the egg are nice and golden brown, but the parts that came from the inside, from the expansion, are nice and light. And that really gives it, I think, a very gorgeous look, and it's going to taste great. It might seem a little darker than you might have thought, but that really, it depends on how much egg you put on there, and it depends on if you were to brush it with egg white versus egg yolk, it would be a little different. So at any rate, this is what we've got, and you can enjoy this anytime that you want. It's great sandwich bread, it's great Friday night bread, it's great Saturday morning French toast bread. So slice it up, keep it in a nice, you know, air open space, and leave it alone.